It's just a habit. I got carried away, my boyfriend admitted when I showed him pictures I found on his laptop. I pressed charges. Now he's in jail. I'm 24. For a year, I had thought my relationship with my boyfriend, Brian, was perfect. He was my rock, a man who seemed to understand me in every way. We lived together, worked full-time, and shared almost everything. But the cracks in our seemingly flawless relationship began to show in the most unexpected way. Brian and I had a great connection from the start. We bonded over shared interests, especially our love for fitness. He and my younger brother Luke, who was really into working out and staying fit, became close friends. They'd go to the gym together and hang out almost every weekend. I remember feeling grateful that they got along so well. It seemed like the perfect situation. Brian would often suggest group activities that included Luke, and I thought he was just being thoughtful, trying to strengthen our family bonds. The frequency of their gym sessions increased over time. Brian would often come home late, explaining that they'd done extra sets or grabbed a protein shake afterward. He'd talk about Luke's progress, his dedication, his form, always with this intensity that I now recognize as something far more disturbing than mere friendly interest. It started innocently enough. One evening, I was home alone and I needed to print something, but my laptop wasn't working. I remembered that Brian had an old laptop lying around, one that he never used. At least that's what he told me. It was always tucked away in his home office, a space I rarely entered out of respect for his privacy. I thought it was just gathering dust, so I grabbed it to see if I could use it to print my document. When I opened it, I was immediately struck by something strange. The laptop hadn't been properly shut down. Instead of going to the desktop, I was taken straight to a photo album. The screen flickered to life, revealing a meticulously organized folder structure. Each folder was dated, going back months before we'd even started dating. What I saw next made my heart drop. There were hundreds of pictures of Luke. Most were from his social media accounts, carefully saved and categorized by date and location. There were screenshots from his Instagram stories, saved before they could expire. Photos from his rugby team's website, arranged chronologically, documenting every game, every practice. But that was just the surface. As I dug deeper, my hands trembling on the trackpad, I discovered more folders. One was labeled Gym Progress, innocent enough at first glance, but inside were secretly taken photos of Luke working out. The timestamps revealed a pattern. Brian had been systematically documenting Luke's gym sessions, capturing moments when he was focused on his exercises, unaware of being watched. The album that made my stomach churn was hidden deeper in a folder innocuously named Backup. It was full of disturbing images, creep shots, and videos of Luke. There were pictures of him sleeping during family gatherings, captured at angles that suggested the photographer had been inches away. Videos of him getting changed in what I recognized as our gym's locker room, completely unaware that he was being recorded. Some photos were taken through windows, through partially opened doors, calculated predatory shots that spoke of a long-term obsession. The most recent additions were the most chilling. A video from just last week showed Luke in our backyard pool, filmed from our bedroom window. The camera lingered on him as he toweled off, the zoom function maximized. I felt physically ill as I realized Brian must have been standing in our room, recording this while I was downstairs making lunch for everyone. My investigative instincts kicked in, even as my emotions threatened to overwhelm me. I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything I found. Screenshots of folder structures, dates, timestamps. I noted how the oldest photos predated our relationship, suggesting this fixation had possibly been the reason Brian had pursued me in the first place. Had I just been a means to get closer to Luke? I found draft messages never sent, saved in text documents. Elaborate fantasies and scenarios involving Luke, some spanning pages. They became more detailed and disturbing over time, tracking with real events I remembered, family dinners, beach trips, casual hangouts that now felt tainted by this hidden narrative. There were even financial records, receipts for a high-end camera purchased 6 months ago, membership fees for Luke's gym despite having his own gym membership closer to work, registration for photography classes that I'd never known about. Everything pointed to a carefully constructed facade, a relationship built on an obsession with Luke rather than any genuine feelings for me. I didn't know what to think. My mind was racing with questions. What was going on? Why would he do this? I didn't know if I should confront him right then and there or if I should just walk away. My stomach was in knots. I went to bed that night unable to face him, my phone filled with evidence of his betrayal, my mind struggling to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the predator whose obsession I'd uncovered. The worst part was realizing how many moments I'd overlooked. The accidental touches when passing Luke in the kitchen. The suggested vacation plans that always seemed to revolve around activities where Luke would be shirtless. The convenient camera upgrades justified as a new hobby. Every memory of our relationship was now being re-examined through this horrifying new lens, and I couldn't help but wonder how I'd been so blind to it all. That night, lying in bed beside him, I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. Each steady breath he took felt like a lie, each shift in his sleep a reminder of the calculated deception I'd discovered. I knew I had to act, had to protect Luke, but the weight of this discovery left me paralyzed, trapped between the person I thought I knew and the disturbing reality I'd uncovered. Update 1. It's been 2 days since my initial post, and thank you for your advice. The weight of what I discovered hasn't gotten any lighter. If anything, it's gotten heavier. After reading your comments, I decided to take a closer look. I went straight to Luke's apartment after work. My brother has always been the easygoing type, the kind of person who laughs off uncomfortable situations. But this was different. When I first tried to explain what I'd found, he laughed, thinking it was some elaborate joke. "Come on, sis," he said, rolling his eyes. "Brian's not like that, he's just a fitness buff like me." But then I opened the laptop. I watched his face change as he scrolled through folder after folder. The color drained from his face, but not in the way I expected. Instead of anger or fear, I saw embarrassment wash over him. He kept mumbling things like, "It's not that bad, and let's not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not that bad," I remember shouting. "Luke, he's been stalking you for over a year. He has pictures of you changing, sleeping, working out. How is this not a big deal?" But Luke just shook his head. "Look, it's weird, yeah, but going to the police, that's extreme. It'll just make everything complicated. Plus, what would people say?" His reaction felt like a punch to the gut. My own brother was more worried about potential embarrassment than his safety. I tried explaining the escalating nature of Brian's obsession, showed him the disturbing writings I'd found, but Luke remained adamant. He didn't want to create drama. The confrontation with Brian came next, and it was worse than I could have imagined. I asked him to come over, making sure Luke was there too. I had the laptop ready, opened one of the folders. Brian's reaction was chilling in its calculation. At first, he was angry, defensive. "How dare you go through my private things?" he snarled. But then, like flipping a switch, his demeanor changed completely. His voice became soft, reasonable. He admitted to everything with an ease that made my skin crawl. "It's just a habit," he said, shrugging. "I got carried away, but I can stop. We can work through this." He turned to Luke, his voice taking on a different tone. "You understand, right? It wasn't meant to hurt anyone." That's when he dropped the bomb that shattered what little composure I had left. With an almost proud smile, he showed us the cameras. Hidden in air vents, behind picture frames, even in the bathroom light fixture. He'd been recording everything, everyone, for months. The casual way he revealed this, like he was showing off a home improvement project, made me physically ill. But the threats started when I began packing my bags. At first, they were subtle. "Think about what this will do to Luke's career," Brian would say, his voice dripping with false concern. "What will people think when they find out? It'll be so embarrassing for everyone." When that didn't work, the threats became more direct. He started sending messages, dozens of them, each more manipulative than the last. "If you tell anyone, I'll make sure everyone knows what a jealous, paranoid girlfriend you are. I have pictures of you too, would be a shame if they got out." The worst part was my family's response. Luke continued to downplay everything, treating it like some minor indiscretion rather than the serious violation it was. My mother, when I finally told her, just sighed and said, "Can't you work this out? Brian comes from such a good family." It felt like I was screaming into a void. No one wanted to acknowledge the severity of what was happening. They wanted me to sweep it under the rug, to pretend everything was fine. Brian had successfully manipulated everyone into thinking I was the problem, the one making mountains out of molehills. The isolation was crushing. Every time I tried to talk about it, someone would shut me down. "You're being dramatic. It's not that serious. Just let it go." Even my closest friends seemed uncomfortable when I brought it up, as if discussing it was worse than what had actually happened. Brian's threats became more sophisticated. He started implying he had connections at the hospital who could make things difficult for me medically if I ever needed care. He mentioned knowing people at my workplace, suggesting my career could suffer if I didn't handle this properly. Each threat was carefully worded, plausibly deniable, but the message was clear: stay quiet or else. The gaslighting was constant. He would send messages reminiscing about good times, then switch to veiled threats, then back to apologies. It was an emotional roller coaster designed to keep me off balance, to make me question my own judgment. Sometimes, in my darker moments, I would catch myself wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe everyone else was right. But then I would remember the folders, the cameras, the calculated way he had infiltrated our lives. The evidence was there, undeniable, no matter how much everyone else wanted to pretend it wasn't. So now I'm stuck in this impossible situation. My brother won't acknowledge the danger he's in, my family wants to preserve their comfortable illusions, and my ex-boyfriend holds enough compromising material to potentially ruin several lives. I've documented everything, saved every threatening message, backed up all the evidence I found, but what good is evidence when no one wants to see it? I don't know what to do next. Every option seems to lead to more pain, more complications. Do I risk everything and go to the authorities anyway? Do I wait until something worse happens? How do I protect my brother when he won't protect himself? The questions keep me up at night, and the answers seem further away than ever. Update 2. It's been a few months since the confrontation, and I'm still struggling to come to terms with everything that happened. The relationship I thought I had was a lie. The man I thought I loved had been living a double life, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But through your comments and support, I knew I had to take action. The evidence on that laptop couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just about me and Luke anymore. I decided to take the laptop to the police. Before doing so, I felt obligated to tell Luke. The moment I called him to announce my decision, everything changed. Within 30 minutes, he was at my door, something I'd never seen from my usually laid-back brother. His face was pale, hands shaking as he burst into tears on my doorstep. "You can't go to the police," he begged, his voice breaking. What came next shocked me to my core. Luke revealed that during one of their gym sessions about 6 months ago, Brian had gotten him drunk intentionally, he now realized. The evening had become hazy, but Brian had taken pictures of Luke in a compromised state, including one where Brian had kissed him while he was barely conscious. Brian had been using these photos as leverage, threatening to show them to me with a fabricated story about Luke betraying his own sister. The manipulation ran deeper than I'd imagined. Brian had orchestrated everything, creating situations where he could gather compromising material on Luke. It wasn't just photos anymore, it was blackmail. "Luke," I said, putting my hands on his shoulders, "what he did to you, that's assault. This isn't your fault, but if we don't stop him now, we won't be his last victims." The next morning, I took everything to the police. The detective assigned to our case had seen similar cases before. She took one look at the laptop's contents and immediately called their cybercrimes unit. What they uncovered was staggering. Brian had multiple external hard drives hidden in his apartment, each containing years of stalking materials. It wasn't just Luke. There were folders upon folders of other victims, former roommates, even colleagues from the hospital where he worked. The investigation revealed a pattern dating back to his college years. Brian had a history of fixating on people, gathering compromising material, and using it for control. His first documented victim was his college roommate in 2018, who had filed a complaint about unauthorized photos but had been too frightened to pursue it when Brian threatened to expose private information about his family. The police found a journal where Brian detailed his conquests, his word for the people he managed to manipulate. He had a system, a methodology for choosing and isolating his victims. He would identify someone he found attractive, then find a way into their social circle. Sometimes, like in my case, he would date someone close to his target. Other times, he would orchestrate chance meetings or join groups his victims frequented. Then came the hospital records. Brian had been using his position as a nurse to access patient information, particularly of young men who matched his type. The hospital's internal investigation revealed he had accessed hundreds of files without authorization, collecting personal details he could use later. The legal consequences came swiftly. Brian was charged with multiple counts of stalking, voyeurism, sexual assault, and unauthorized access of medical records. The district attorney added charges of blackmail and cyberstalking when they found evidence of him using fake social media accounts to monitor his victims. His lawyer tried to paint it as a mental health issue, arguing that Brian needed treatment rather than punishment. But the methodical nature of his actions, the detailed planning in his journal, and the sophisticated way he had hidden his tracks showed this wasn't just compulsion. It was calculated predation. During the investigation, more disturbing details emerged about Brian's past. His previous employer, another hospital in a different state, had received complaints about his behavior, but he had resigned before any formal investigation could begin. He had a pattern of moving every few years, starting fresh in new cities where no one knew his history. The trial was brutal. I had to testify about finding the laptop, about the cameras in our home, about how he had manipulated everyone around him. Luke testified too, finally breaking his silence about the assault. Watching my brother shake on the stand as he recounted what happened was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Brian showed no remorse throughout the proceedings. He sat there, calm and collected, sometimes even smirking when victims described their experiences. His only display of emotion came when the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge didn't show mercy. Citing the premeditated nature of his crimes and the number of victims, she sentenced him to 15 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 10 years. He would have to register as a sex offender upon release, and restraining orders were put in place for all known victims. But the legal victory didn't immediately heal the emotional wounds. My family, who had initially dismissed my concerns, now had to face their role in enabling Brian's behavior. My mother apologized tearfully, admitting she had prioritized keeping peace over protecting her children. Luke and I are in therapy, both individually and together, working through the trauma of what happened. The aftermath has been a process of rebuilding trust, rebuilding relationships, rebuilding our sense of safety. I've installed security systems in my new apartment, and I'm much more cautious about who I let into my life. Luke has started advocating for other victims of stalking and assault, turning his experience into something that might help others. Looking back, I've learned hard lessons about trust, boundaries, and the people you allow into your life. The betrayal didn't just come from Brian, it came from my own family as well. I've realized that it's okay to protect myself, even if it means standing alone. I don't owe anyone my peace of mind, especially when they've shown that they're willing to sacrifice my well-being for their own comfort. The investigation also revealed how many people might have stopped Brian earlier but chose not to get involved. Former colleagues who had noticed his odd behavior but didn't report it. Friends who had seen red flags but didn't want to cause drama. It's a reminder that staying silent doesn't protect anyone, it only gives predators more power. The journey isn't over. Brian's appeals are still working their way through the system, and every now and then we hear he's trying to contact victims from prison. But I'm learning to trust myself again, to recognize red flags and to speak up when something feels wrong. And while I'll never forget what happened, I'm starting to heal. Today, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life. I've started dating again, carefully and with clear boundaries. Luke and I are closer than ever, our shared experience having forged a stronger bond between us. And most importantly, I'm no longer afraid to speak my truth, even when others might prefer I stay silent.